Good. All right, so we're going to talk about anti-forensics a little bit. This is the Express edition because this is a 60-minute talk in a half-an-hour slot, so I'm going to go real fast through some of this. If you've got questions, jump in front of the train. So, who am I? I'm Jason Andress. I have been in some capacity in the computing and IT field for like 15 and some years now, including security stuff. I do have a doctorate in computer science. I teach also, and I've written a couple of books now. So, what is anti-forensics? There's a bunch of different stuff we can be talking about. We're speaking specifically about digital anti-forensics. If you're looking for the talk on how to get blood out of your carpet and DNA off of things, come see me after. So, a few main goals of anti-forensics. We're looking potentially to make the collection process take longer. We're going to try and make data harder to find in general. We'd like to make it difficult or impossible to recover at all, although impossible is a very tall order. We want to make analysis of the data harder once it's actually collected, and we want to make attribution more difficult if we can when they've actually got the data. So making it hard to figure out who exactly did what in the mess of stuff that they've collected. Why do you need to know about this? A couple of major reasons. Basically, if you want to hide things from whoever, or you want to find things that whoever has hidden. Again, anti-forensics of what? You know, anti-forensics is a very broad term. So we can be talking about a bunch of different tools, techniques, focusing on different things. We can be looking at host anti-forensics, so, you know, PCs, whatever the operating system is, mobile devices, which is becoming a lot more popular. Lots of people running around with phones and tablets and things strapped to their head that report everything to Google. Network anti-forensics, you know, covering up the tracks of whatever you happen to have been doing on the network. Application and malware anti-forensics, which are kind of two sides of the same coin. So keeping people from figuring out what exactly your software is doing under the hood, whether it's good or bad software. Primarily what I'm going to be talking about is host anti-forensics here. So how successful are anti-forensic efforts in general? Kind of depends on who's investigating you and what exactly it is that you have done. You know, if it's your family and friends, if it's your wife digging through the computer looking for your porn stash, it's probably not going to take much to hide that. You know, nice hidden folder, stick it somewhere strange in a multi-nested directory, and you're probably good. If it is your employer investigating your misbehavior at work, that kind of depends. You know, if it's a really small shop that doesn't have dedicated forensic folks, you're probably not up against much. If it is a great big organization that has an entire dedicated forensic team, again, you might have issues. Same thing for local law enforcement looking for, you know, evidence of crimes. It depends on the law enforcement in question. You know, if it's again local guys who don't do this all the time, probably not a lot of effort there. But law enforcement in bigger cities that again has dedicated people for this that do this every day, you could have a much harder task. And then, of course, we've got, you know, the FBI, NSA, whatever TLA you care to name, the state in general, looking for the nuclear secrets that you stole or your porn stash or your UFO pictures. You've probably got an issue at that point. You know, these are really professional folks that have got resources that other people don't have. There's, of course, a nice XKCD cartoon for this. You know, whatever it is that you've done to hide stuff from the NSA, if you've really gotten their attention at that point, we're talking about an entirely different set of techniques. Okay, so some general statements about forensic investigations starting out. So the majority of forensic tools and techniques are extremely Microsoft-centric, and that's because they've got the huge market share. You know, most everybody's using a Microsoft OS, except maybe the group of people here. And they're using Office and Internet Explorer and all that other good stuff that is very nicely packaged up for them. And the forensic tools will pull the data back out of this like a dream. You as a forensic investigator, you love to see somebody that's running all Microsoft tools, because we can just fish all the stuff right back out of it. Not a problem at all. And kind of as a corollary to that, very common applications are really well supported in the forensic tools. If you're doing digging for browser artifacts and you've got like IE, Firefox, Chrome, again, right there, the tool's going to pull it out, not a problem. If you're using something weird, you're using a text-based browser on Linux, you might not get anything back at all unless the analyst knows how to manually go fish for that stuff, because it's just really not well supported in the set of tools. Most of the really easy anti-forensic techniques, which we'll touch on a little bit more, like hidden directories, renaming your file extensions, it is wasted effort. The forensic tools will kick this stuff right back out. There's a very nice function in Ncase that's go find me all the files where the file extension doesn't match the magic number in the header. It's that simple, because these are really common things that people who don't know any better try to hide their bad stuff. A lot of forensic techniques, as I mentioned with changing the file extensions, depend a lot on user laziness and lack of knowledge. So they'll go comb for common stuff, but once you get out of a certain depth, it's a lot of manual work from the analyst to go get things back past the things that a smart/well-educated person would do to hide stuff. Also, if you are trying to hide things, small errors will screw you. Particularly in Windows, if you're talking about like registry artifacts, it is actually creepy when you start to learn about the stuff that Microsoft keeps in the registry. Because there's stuff in there where you look at it and think, there's no possible reason that you could really want to store this for any sort of operating system function, so it must be there for people to come dig up later. And these things are scattered far and wide in the registry to the point where you've got to go use tools to try and get them out, and then your tools will leave traces. So it's really hard to get all that stuff. And of course, as I mentioned, you get the attention of the NSA. Against a sufficient application of resources, you're gonna lose, no matter what you do. Even if you clean up your box, if the folks are tapping the network infrastructure at your ISP to collect the information, then it's a problem. And of course, I'm not a lawyer. Your mileage may vary. I'm not giving you advice. So, some main categories of anti-forensic methods. We can try and avoid creation of data in the first place. We can try and hide what we have created. We can try and wipe artifacts. We can try and obfuscate things that leave trails in our OSs. And then, last but not least, we can try and directly attack the forensic tools that will be used to try to collect this stuff. So, avoiding data creation in the first place. I've got to mention browser privacy mode here, because lots of people think it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. Not really so much. So, browser privacy mode, otherwise known as porn mode, turns off some really gross creation of data, but it doesn't get rid of it all by any stretch of the imagination. You're still going to make a ton of data. It may make somebody dig slightly harder to get it back, but browser privacy mode in any browser is no surety of hiding much of anything. Don't write to storage in the first place. You can use things like portable apps. There are suites of portable apps that are basically an app tweaked so that it'll run on something like a USB stick and deliberately not leave traces in the operating system because it's not installed. Usually if they write to something, they write to whatever the storage is. This kind of varies to a certain amount, and if you're writing to the storage on the USB stick, you still are creating data somewhere, just not necessarily in the OS, although not necessarily not. It'll still probably create some, and it'll be in RAM. Live CDs and USB distributions. I like live CDs really well for this kind of stuff. You boot the live CD up in the machine, it has no knowledge of the storage that lives in there, so unless somebody catches the machine up to be able to dump the stuff out of RAM, that's a reasonably certain thing. With USB distributions, you can usually set some persistence, so you need to be careful not to set that stuff if you don't want to leave those traces around. You can do the same thing with the live CDs usually. It is generally something that you have to do intentionally to go set that up. I don't think there are a lot of distros that will do it for you. And then remoting another machine or using a virtual machine locally to try and confine all of your data creation to one spot. Generally, a relatively sound thing. If you're remoting a machine to do it, you've just moved all the data somewhere else. Hopefully somewhere else where whoever's investigating you can't get it, but I wouldn't count too strongly on that. And of course, you will be leaving traces pointing to wherever it is that you have remoted. If you are using a virtual machine locally, not quite as sound. You may be confining a bunch of the data to it. You may have it encrypted. You're still stepping on the operating system quite a bit. You've got files out there that are your disk and RAM and all that other good stuff. So, good but not as sound. So hiding the data that we have made or locking it up so that people can't get at it. We have encryption to look at. So file or disk encryption. Depending on the encryption that you have used, the strength of it, a lot of other factors like where the key lives in RAM and all that whatnot. You have made it harder, and you may be putting it out of the reach of someone who doesn't have a lot of skills or resources to apply to getting it back. But it is still there, and there are still methods to get around this stuff. If you go look for full disk encryption bypass methods on Google, there's stuff out there that'll get past TrueCrypt. Usually involving going and fetching the encryption keys out of RAM on a machine when you find it up, but you can get past it. Hiding shared data. I won't talk about all these individually. Most of them are relatively useless in the sense of hiding from forensic tools. Most of the common stuff that you can do, the tools know how to bypass really easily. And what I call Jedi mind tricks. So these are great if the OS is actually up, if a live capture is being done of the box, and you've got some kind of rootkit-like tool in there, then you can do these are not the droids you're looking for to the forensic tools. The problem, of course, is if they are not doing a live capture, then your kernel nasty is not up and running, and it won't be able to perform those tasks for you. Same thing with memory tampering. There's a really cool tool called Dementia, which can do some really interesting tampering with memory. If you haven't checked that out, definitely something to look into. And Stego stuff, of course, if you can hide the data where they don't know that it's not there in the first place to go looking for it, then that can be a somewhat successful technique. Although there are lots of ways to go look at files to see if they've got Stego hidden data in them. Looking at the entropy of the file and whatnot, you can usually tell that something is there, even if you can't get it. Artifact wiping. So removing files, wiping disks, files, free space on the disk. These all kind of fall into the same category. And again, it's a matter of the resources of the folks who are trying to get the data back. In general, with modern disk storage or media, whatever you have in general, going through and zeroing the disk will get you past most forensic tools. However, if you've got somebody who's got the resources, to go do like spin stand imaging and physically look at the bits on the disk, then the potential does exist to go and get some of the data back from that. Throwing away encryption keys, by that I'm referring to the capability that's on a lot of the new solid-state disks, like Intel's nicer disks, have got full disk encryption built into the drive electronics. And basically you set a password when you set it up, and when you want to fast wipe the disk, it just burns the encryption key and then considers the disk to be wiped. In theory, even Intel can't get that stuff back, but I wouldn't depend my life on it. So, but definitely superior to any kind of wiping that you're going to do with like a magnetic media. Tampering with memory, so you can bulk wipe stuff out of memory, try and dump what you can out of it. You can also go and actually alter the values of some things. So if you've got somebody who's like fishing through RAM trying to pull encryption keys out of it, you could potentially go and tweak what is actually stored out there and feed them something different, which has some interesting possibilities. And then, of course, physical methods. If you've got a media and you smash the hell out of it with a hammer into tiny little pieces or melt it down into an ingot, you've probably gotten it past most reasonable recovery methods. However, if you're doing something like drilling holes in platters or taking your whopping giant neodymium magnet in the hopes that it's going to disrupt a magnetic disk enough, then probably not so much. So if you're going to do that, you have to actually be relatively thorough with it. Trail obfuscation, trails in the operating systems. Event log tampering, it depends on the operating system you're on. Recent Microsoft operating systems have taken great efforts to make actually tampering with the event logs really, really hard, like to the point where I don't know of any current tools that'll do that successfully. Yes, you can get rid of it, but actually going and tweaking what's in there is a pretty difficult task. General spoofing of things in the data. So if you can do things like spoofing account names or IPs or something like that, you're kind of messing with the analyst at that point, who's actually going to be looking at the data once it's collected. So if they're trying to pull out a subset of the data out of, the 4 terabytes of disk that they imaged, then that can make some things a little trickier for them. Same thing with, manipulating accounts, doing some activity over multiple accounts. So if they're trying to pull out the account that you're supposed to be using, then they might not get some of that data. Or naming accounts where they'll miss the differences in accounts, an O for a 0 or a 1 for a lowercase l. Again, something the guy doing the manual analysis might miss. Malware is always good for excuses for things. Gee, I don't know how all that porn got on my box. There's a piece of malware on there. I guess it wasn't me. And of course, remote and virtual machines, again, are good for that kind of stuff. So attacks against forensic tools. This is kind of interesting stuff, although it's definitely a two-edged sword. So we can try and do things to disrupt the creation of images in the first place. Encryption is good for this. If you're using really strong encryption and you have not slipped up somewhere to let somebody get around it, then it will be relatively difficult for anybody to go recover, without going and applying some serious computing resources to it. Doing things with the actual disk to make this stuff difficult to get back is kind of an interesting thing. Going and marking blocks bad. You see this as a mentioned technique sometimes when you're looking at anti-forensic stuff. A lot of the tools know that trick and can get around it. Odd file systems. This is back to the forensic tools are made to look at common things comment from earlier. If you're using a really oddball really oddball file system, then your tool may or may not be able to do something with that, although you're having to go to some really odd file systems to get to that point. Compression bombs. Compression bombs are very cool. It is not a technique that I would necessarily recommend, but it's neat anyway. Look up 42.zip sometime. It is a 42-layer nested archive file, and due to some archive weirdness, it expands out to like 4 petabytes when you open it. It's a little teeny tiny file. So if you've got a forensic tool that is going through opening zip files, trying to figure out what's in them, looking for file content, and it hits something like that, it may just very well stick its feet up in the air, because you have likely exceeded its capacity when it tries to expand that stuff. Same thing for really deeply nested or recursive directories. This is a good technique for tools in general, not just forensic tools, that'll sit and try and parse a directory structure. If you give it a recursive directory structure that just goes forever, then the tool may just follow that off into the weeds and never come back. Some particular techniques along those lines, the tool creators know about the stuff and they've put fixes in there for it, but there's always new and interesting things you can do. Memory tampering, yet again, if you can tweak stuff enough when somebody is trying to take a dump of your RAM, then they may not get anything meaningful back out of that. Disrupting analysis, I've talked about that a couple of times in here. So, this is actually messing with the analyst when they're trying to look at the data, not necessarily messing with tools or disrupting the creation. So changing signatures of files around. I mentioned earlier, if you change the file extension, but you don't change the magic number in the header, then the tools will usually kick that out. But if you change the file extension and the magic number in the header, it is a considerably deeper and more detailed analysis that will actually kick that kind of stuff out. So usually the automated tools will go extension, magic number, yep, good to go. That's a text file. Hash tampering, kind of iffy territory. Making actual real hash collisions for files or altering files to try and make them match a specific hash is kind of iffy, and I would say certainly trying to do it on any large scale where that would be a preferable technique to something else would be pretty questionable. If you look at forensic tool sets, You know, they've got these huge libraries of hashes to go kick out known files, whether it's, you know, porn or operating system or whatnot. But, you know, kind of an interesting thing. Altering timestamps I throw in there just as, you know, a good opportunity to make a cautionary comment. On most operating systems, you will never alter the timestamp thoroughly enough to keep the tool from figuring out that you've done that, particularly on Windows. You know, if you've gone and altered a timestamp somewhere, then there's 50 places that it's sitting in the registry somewhere, and you probably won't get them all. And then, of course, misinformation or overinformation, very good for messing with the analyst and to a certain extent the tool. You know, if I've got a machine that you know, I know has the potential for somebody to come and try to do a collection on it and analyze what I've got on there, and, you know, maybe pull out some documents that I've copied from somewhere that I shouldn't have. If I've got 5 documents that I'm really concerned about, and I put 5 million documents on the disk that are all similar to whatever it is that I'm trying to hide, you probably won't be able to fish the real ones out of there unless you have a very specific idea of what it is. And then, of course, you know, misinformation, you know, you can always plant things for a potential analyst to find and give them a very nice, green, well-trodden trail to go down. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Maybe it would depend on the archival tool you used. A lot of archival tools will, at least to a certain extent, try to unpack that kind of a file when it first opens it, and you may blow up your archival tool. You know, it's something interesting to experiment out. 42.zip is actually not a tool; it is actually a file. And, you know, you could script something up to go and build yourself a file like that. But, you know, be careful when you're doing that, because you might blow yourself up in the process of trying to make that kind of file. But it's cool to look at, nonetheless. Fun toys to play with. Okay, so wrapping up stuff, don't get the attention of Big Brother. You know, if you have gone and poked the bear and the NSA knows your name and is looking at your computer personally, you're fucked at that point. So don't do that. Forensic investigators and tool developers know about the simple techniques that you might use to hide stuff, you know, hiding files, changing file extensions, and you're wasting your time by, you know, making that shallow of a pass at trying to hide something. Potentially, again, it's back to the depends on what you've done and depends on who's looking at you. No, probably not. I mean, I guess it depends on what you're hiding. You know, if you're hiding your porn from whoever, then you're probably okay, depending on your porn, I guess. Let's see. So doing this successfully is more than likely going to be a multi-step process. You know, you're going to have to do not one thing, but 2 or 3 or 6 things, you know, in order to successfully avoid, you know, a good collection and analysis. And very most small mistakes can be costly. You know, if you are going through trying to scrub stuff out of the Windows registry and you miss one little thing somewhere, that may very well be enough to give the analyst what they need to, you know, figure out what's going on, what you've been doing. Thank you for your attention. I think we have like no time for questions, but I'll hang out in the hall if you got anything. You can catch me at jason@hollyhack.com on email or at jason_andress on Twitter.